You wake before the city does. The sky above the floodplain is still the color of ash, and the air carries the smell of the river. Thick, organic, faintly rotten. The way water smells when it has been carrying silt for 1,000 miles. You rise from a reed mat on a plastered floor. The room is small. Not because you are poor, you are not poor, but because every room inside the Ziggurat complex is built for function, not comfort. The walls are mud brick. They absorb the night's coolness and will release it slowly through the morning, which is the only mercy the architecture offers. Your feet find the floor. The surface is smooth from years of use, worn by the passage of sandals and bare soles that preceded you by generations. You do not light a lamp yet. You know this space by shape, by memory, by the particular arrangement of vessels along the eastern wall. Oil, water, cedar resin. Each one placed in an order that was established before you held this role and will remain after you are gone. Outside, you can hear the earliest temple workers beginning their movements, the creak of wooden doors, the low sound of oxen being moved from their enclosures. The city of Ur is waking, and it wakes in layers. The temple complex first, then the merchant quarters, then the houses that press against the outer walls of the sacred precinct, like people leaning against something warm. You are the N, the high priest, the figure at the center of the machine, and the machine does not wait. The Ziggurat worked for the god, for the city, for the palace. For everyone else, it was a system of obligations with no exit. In the 3rd millennium BCE, the city-states of southern Mesopotamia organized themselves around a principle that modern minds find genuinely difficult to grasp. The land did not belong to the city. It did not belong to the king. It belonged to the god. Every field, every canal, every granary, every draft animal was, in the most literal administrative sense, divine property. The temple was not a place of worship beside the economy. The temple was the economy. You are its chief executive. Your title, N, carries within it the full weight of that structure. You are not simply a spiritual authority. You are the manager of the god's estate, and the god's estate encompasses tens of thousands of people. There are the temple dependents, workers who receive their subsistence directly from the temple storehouses in the form of ration allotments, barley, oil, wool. There are the craftsmen bound to temple production. There are the farmers leasing fields from the divine estate and paying their obligations in grain at harvest. There are the scribes who record every transaction, every allocation, every dispute onto small tablets of wet clay that are then dried, stored and retrieved with a precision that would not seem out of place in a modern archive. You oversee all of it. Your morning does not begin with meditation. It begins with reports. A junior administrator meets you at the threshold of the inner courtyard with a stack of tablets. Yesterday's grain distribution, a dispute over an irrigation channel between two leased plots, a shortage of draft animals in the northern fields, a ritual calendar reminder. In 4 days, the monthly offering to Nana, the moon god, requires a specific number of cattle, and the cattle must be of a specific age, without blemish, confirmed by the head herdsman in writing. You read each tablet with the focused attention of someone who knows that a single misallocation, a wrong number, a field wrongly assigned, a ration withheld, can fracture the quiet obedience that keeps this entire structure standing. This is who you are. Now the question is unavoidable. What does this life cost your body every single day? The physical demands of your role begin before the sun clears the horizon. The first ritual of the morning requires you to stand in the inner sanctuary, clean-handed, wearing garments that were laundered and blessed the day before, and to present the morning meal to the divine statue of Nana. This is not a symbolic gesture. It is a feeding. Temple records from sites across southern Mesopotamia document the exact rations delivered to the god's image each day: bread, beer, fish, dates, dairy, multiple courses, served in specific vessels, in a specific order, with specific incantations spoken in Sumerian, a language that, by this period, is already giving way to Akkadian in daily speech, which means you are praying in a tongue that your own household staff does not fully understand. The ritual must be exact, not approximately correct. Exact. Mesopotamian religious thinking was built on a principle of reciprocity. The gods sustained the city only as long as the city sustained the gods. A ritual performed incorrectly was not an impiety, it was a technical failure. The practical consequences were understood as real. A drought, a flood, a military defeat. These were not punishments from a distant moral authority. They were the predictable outcomes of a system that had been disrupted. You have memorized hundreds of ritual sequences. You have spent years in the Adaba, the scribal school, learning them. Your hands know the gestures, your voice knows the cadence, but the body still tires. You stand, kneel, lift, pour, process through corridors and up stairways built for ceremony, not for comfort. By mid-morning, you have already walked the equivalent of several city blocks within the Ziggurat complex alone, carrying the posture and the precision that your role demands. At every moment you are visible. And you are always visible. The temple complex feeds thousands of people. Every one of them depends, directly or indirectly, on the decisions made inside the rooms you move through each day. But the food that sustains them is not guaranteed. It is calculated. The Sumerian agricultural system was sophisticated. Canals, dikes, regulated flooding, crop rotation across irrigated and rain-fed zones. But sophistication is not the same as reliability. The floodplain of the Tigris and Euphrates was unpredictable in ways that no administrative system could fully contain. A flood that arrived 2 weeks too late left fields unwatered during the critical germination period. A flood that arrived 2 weeks too early could destroy an entire harvest that was nearly ready for cutting. Salinization, the slow accumulation of mineral salts in irrigated soil, was already reducing yields across whole districts. A problem that Sumerian scribes documented with the careful language of people watching something they do not know how to stop. You know the granary records. You know which storehouses are full and which ones are drawing down faster than expected. The ration system that feeds the temple workers is calibrated to a normal harvest. A bad year does not simply mean less food. It means a recalculation that touches every single allocation in the system. Who receives full rations? Who receives partial? Who receives nothing because their labor category falls below the threshold when quantities contract? These are decisions made in rooms, on clay tablets, in the language of administrative precision. But on the other side of those tablets are people whose bodies are doing the work that keeps the god's estate operational. Archaeologists working at sites across the Sumerian heartland have found skeletal evidence of chronic nutritional stress in population groups associated with temple labor. Compressed vertebrae, signs of anemia, bone density consistent with diets that were technically adequate and functionally grinding. You sign the ration documents. The math is correct. The hunger is also correct. The Ziggurat complex was not a clean place. It was a living institution, and living institutions accumulate the debris of biological reality in ways that no amount of ritual purification could fully address. Livestock were slaughtered within the sacred precinct for offerings. Blood and waste were managed, but not eliminated. Water came from canals that also carried agricultural runoff, animal waste, and the output of a dense urban population that had no sewage system in the modern sense. Drinking water and contaminated water occupied the same channels, separated only by the distance between intake points and outflow. The workers who lived within or adjacent to the temple complex were exposed to this constantly. Gastrointestinal illness was endemic, not epidemic, not dramatic, just perpetually present. A child who survived infancy in Ur had already passed through a biological filter that removed a significant fraction of its birth cohort. Medical texts from the period, written in cuneiform, attributed to divine origin, and administered by specialists called Asipu and Azu, record treatments for fevers, digestive disorders, skin conditions, and eye diseases, with a frequency that tells its own story about how common these conditions were. You yourself are not immune. You are better fed than most people in this city, and better fed means more resilient. But the temple complex does not excuse you from the same water, the same air, the same proximity to the biological realities of a pre-sanitation urban environment. Priests and administrators in Mesopotamian records are listed as dying young with the same unsentimental brevity as anyone else. The title provided no biological protection. It only provided better rations while the body lasted. And there is something else. Something no one addresses directly. There is a detail embedded in the administrative logic of the Sumerian temple economy that the modern mind tends to process as a metaphor before realizing it is a literal fact. The temple worked on debt, not moral debt, financial debt, recorded, compounding, legally enforceable debt. Farmers who leased temple land paid their obligations in grain at harvest. When harvests were short, and they were short with regularity, those obligations did not disappear. They accumulated with interest. Mesopotamian law codes from the period include provisions for debt slavery. A farmer who could not pay his obligations to the temple could be required to send a family member, a child, a spouse, to work off the debt within the temple household. This was not a metaphor for servitude. This was a contractual arrangement recorded on clay tablets, administered by scribes, authorized by the NI. The people doing this were not cruel. They were operating a system designed to remain solvent. The god's estate had its own obligations to feed its workers, to fund its rituals, to maintain its infrastructure. And those obligations did not flex because a farming family had a bad year. The system was built on the assumption that the earth would produce enough, that the canals would hold, that the floods would arrive on time. When any of those assumptions failed, the human cost was collected from the weakest points in the chain. You sign those documents too. The language is administrative. The reality underneath the language is a child leaving their family to grind grain inside a temple they will never leave. Mesopotamian legal texts that regulated this practice are evidence that it was common enough to require regulation. You do not legislate against myths. You legislate against things that are already happening. Your authority within the temple complex is substantial, but it exists inside a larger structure that does not defer to you. The palace, the Lugal, the great man, the king, operates in permanent negotiation with the temple for resources, labor, and legitimacy. In some periods and some cities, these two institutions are in direct competition. The temple controls land and grain. The palace controls military force and external trade. Each needs what the other has. The negotiation between them is constant, and it is never equal. And the direction in which it tilts changes with harvests, wars, and the relative political skill of the individuals holding each position. You are not simply a religious administrator. You are a political figure operating inside that negotiation every day. Decisions about which temple lands are allocated to palace-sponsored military campaigns. Decisions about whether temple grain reserves can be accessed to fund a military expedition without adequate replacement. Decisions about which royal building projects, a new palace annex, a canal expansion, a city wall, require the kind of divine legitimation that only the temple can confer, and what the temple receives in return. There are no clean lines. Every ritual act you perform carries political weight. When you declare that the god has authorized a particular royal action, you are not simply relaying divine instruction. You are making a statement about where power sits and who holds the authority to confirm it. get that calculation wrong, misjudge the political moment, align with a faction that loses, withhold support from a king who survives, and the consequences for the temple are not abstract. Mesopotamian records document temples stripped of land grants, end figures removed and replaced, entire priestly lineages interrupted by political realignment. The god is eternal. The N is replaceable. The role of the N carried, in certain city-states and certain periods, a dimension that is often noted in academic literature and almost never fully explained in popular accounts. In some Sumerian cities, the N was not simply a priest, but a ritual spouse of the deity, a figure who participated in ceremonies designed to enact the marriage of the god to the city, ensuring fertility of the land, the canals, and the people. This ritual, which scholars refer to as the sacred marriage, was not symbolic in the way that modern audiences tend to assume. The vulnerability embedded in this role was not physical in the conventional sense. It was existential. The N's body was a ritual object, not metaphorically, practically. The condition of the N's body, their health, their purity, their ritual correctness was understood to have direct consequences for the city's material welfare. A priest who became ritually impure, who fell ill at the wrong moment, who failed to maintain the precise physical standards the role demanded, did not simply create a personal spiritual problem. They created a structural problem for the entire city. The god's relationship with the city passed through the N's body as though through a conduit. If the conduit was compromised, the flow stopped. This meant that the N lived under a form of surveillance that had no private dimension. Their body belonged to the institution. Their health was an administrative concern. Their ritual purity was monitored by subordinate priests whose role included reporting failures. The most intimate aspects of physical existence, illness, menstruation, sexual contact, contact with death, each required specific purification protocols before the N could re-enter the sacred precinct. Failure to observe these protocols, even unknowingly, was not forgiven by good intentions. The ritual logic of Sumer did not have a category for honest mistakes. The temple economy did not fail often. That is important to understand. For most of its operational history, the Sumerian Ziggurat complex was one of the most stable institutions in the ancient world. It redistributed resources, managed labor, maintained infrastructure, and sustained a large population through a coordination mechanism more sophisticated than anything else existing on Earth at the time. But when it began to fail, the failure did not arrive as a single event. It arrived as a sequence. First, the yields dropped, across multiple harvest cycles in multiple districts, for reasons that accumulated rather than announced themselves. Salinization had been progressing for generations in some zones. Canal silting reduced flow to fields that had been reliable for decades. A shift in flood timing disrupted planting schedules across entire regions. The granaries began drawing down. The ration allocations contracted. Workers who received partial rations worked less efficiently, not because they were lazy, but because the body under caloric stress does not perform at the same level as the body adequately fed. Output fell. The obligations remained. Then the debt load grew. Farmers who could not meet their obligations were required to make up the difference in the following season, with interest. But the following season produced the same diminished yields, or worse. The debt compounded faster than the harvest could address it. Families fragmented, members sent to temple labor, fields abandoned when no household had enough hands to work them, irrigation maintenance falling behind because the labor to maintain it was now working inside the precinct grinding grain to service debts. Then the political structure felt the pressure. A temple with contracting resources had less to offer the palace. A palace with less divine legitimation had less to offer its military campaigns. The city's capacity to defend its irrigation infrastructure against rival city-states weakened at the exact moment when the infrastructure itself was already under stress. Tablets from the late 3rd millennium BCE document administrative systems, still recording and allocating resources with perfect bureaucratic precision long after the material base those records described had ceased to exist at anything close to the scale the records implied. The machine kept writing. The harvest had already stopped arriving. The people who sustained this system were not passive. Their persistence was not heroism. It was the quieter, harder work of finding the minimum necessary to continue. A family whose ration allocation had been cut did not simply accept the reduction. They foraged. Reed marshes along the river margins produced fish, birds, and edible plants outside the temple economy's accounting. A household that had lost a member to debt labor reorganized itself around the remaining members. Older children taking on work that had previously been divided among more hands. Women managing field tasks alongside domestic production. Elderly members contributing what their bodies could still offer. The flexibility of the household unit was the actual shock absorber of the system, and it absorbed shocks that the official records do not record because they were managed below the level of administrative visibility. Within the temple complex, junior priests and lower administrative staff developed informal economies of favor and exchange. Small allocations redirected, rations supplemented through personal networks, access to temple resources brokered through relationships that the official hierarchy neither acknowledged nor effectively prohibited. The system was too large to monitor completely. In the gaps of that monitoring, people survived. The N navigated this too. Not above it, not immune from it, but inside it, managing a structure whose official logic and whose actual operation were always at some distance from each other, and whose continued functioning depended on the willingness of people at every level to find that distance and use it. When you imagine ancient Sumer, you might picture a world of epic grandeur. Stepped towers rising into a bronze sky, priests in white linen, the birth of writing and law and civilization. That image is not wrong. It is incomplete in a way that changes everything. What the Ziggurat actually produced was administration. Dense, tireless, consequential administration. The writing that emerged from Sumer was not poetry first. It was accounting. The law that emerged from Sumer was not justice first. It was debt management. The religion that built those towers was not transcendence first. It was labor organization. Every element of what we recognize as civilization was, at its origin, a solution to a logistical problem. And the logistical problems never stopped. The high priest of ancient Sumer was not elevated above the difficulty of that world. He was its most burdened inhabitant. He held the weight of the god's account ledger in one hand and the fragility of the city's food supply in the other, and he walked a set of ritual stairs every morning in precise garments, while knowing that the entire structure beneath those stairs was held together by calculations that assumed more than the earth reliably gave. The civilization that built the first cities was also the first to document what it cost to keep them standing. The tablets they left behind are not monuments, they are receipts. If you had lived one single day inside that role, one morning ritual, one stack of administrative tablets, one decision about who receives full rations and who receives partial, what do you think you would have broken first? The ritual precision, the political composure, or the math? Leave your answer in the comments. If this kind of deep historical immersion is what you come here for, subscribe. There are more of these coming. The next civilization we step inside may be even less forgiving than this one.